Welcome to Deep Learning. I'm JT Parr. Today we are joined by Rabbi Mordecai Finley. He is a U.S. Marine Corps Sergeant and Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Former Sergeant and Jiu-Jitsu black belt who co-founded the Ohr HaTorah synagogue in Los Angeles. He provides counseling through his wisdom work classes where he draws from numerous texts and spiritual practices to produce novel insights about psychology and interpersonal relationships.
Sounds good enough.
What made you want to join the Marine Corps?
You know, whenever somebody makes a complex decision, I have a mythic number, the 15 motivations, just to cover everything. But the core motivation for me was spiritual.
So you were looking for meaning?
I was looking for discipline.
Did you feel like you didn't have discipline?
It was Southern California, 1970s, and
pretty laid back.
Not just being mischievous, you know.
Smoking
pot, cars, running around,
chicks,
doing crazy stuff, and I knew I had potential. I knew I had real potential. I knew people who went to college, they made it an extension of high school, and I didn't want to be that person. And so it starts with, I wanted to focus. I wanted to be somewhere I could just live super disciplined, super clean, like in a Buddhist monastery. And so when I was thinking about joining the military, I went to the Air Force and they said, oh yeah, it's super chill. We have beer machines in the barracks. I started forgetting about that. When I went to the Marine, he says, we will kick your ass from dawn to dusk and then from dusk to dawn and you can't talk. I said, that's the one. That's the one.
So what drew you to that kind of like Spartan lifestyle?
I needed it. If I were going to succeed as a human being, I needed to have that discipline. I knew it.
And did you ever like look at your parents and you were like, you guys are not disciplining me enough?
I was born with a gift. It's like going to Juilliard. I mean, I've I don't know why, sunspots, whatever, but I was born with a gift of intellect and spirit. More than my family was sympathetic, but I was reading things, doing things that was not in my natal family. I'm just going to have to say it was an accident of genetics, birth, history. You know, whatever creates a life.
There was just a spark there.
I was born with something.
You got a spark.
Yeah, like a natural musician, a natural athlete. So I was born with something. Yeah.
And you would say you're a natural what?
Well, I would say I'm a natural person of depth. So when I was in 9th grade, I read.
That's a crazy thing to say.
Well, look, some people aren't. I was reading Camus and Nietzsche when I was a 9th, 10th grade. I could list you all I read novels as well. I was a huge reader, but I read philosophy. I read Socrates, and I didn't know anybody who did. I didn't know any adults who did that.
And was this driven by a desire to be superior to others?
No, it's just interesting.
It is cool.
I was very into existentialism.
Making this life, if this is all there is, make it worth it.
You know, that's more of a
modern
recent
take
interpretation.
On it.
I mean, existentialism. I would say for most who do the history, it's Kierkegaard, some aspects of Tolstoy. Nietzsche is probably the most famous, and it's not a school of thought. It's an intellectual, spiritual attitude. And I can give you the 1 minute on it. You can't trust any system. So someone says, hey, Christianity, here's the system. Judaism, this is a system. Somebody made that up. Somebody created it. And then you subjugate your personality to a system that came into history at a certain time. So it's kind of recovering some deep sense of self before a system takes you over. So your existence as a human being is primary. You try to create the primary spark of whatever it means to be a human being without the system intervening. So I love Nietzsche, for example. He really wanted to, recover that
the Übermensch.
No, actually not. The Übermensch is a very misunderstood concept. He thinks what he calls
because of Hitler.
Yeah. There's it's just ridiculous. I mean, whenever people
the way people take it.
Yeah, because they're ignorant.
Yeah.
So he meant Übermensch. He meant like the Aryan personality. For Nietzsche would be the person who broke out of the chains of accepting things you've never thought about.
Yeah, so like to be a Nazi would be to be subservient to Hitler, which was antithetical to what Nietzsche thought was the way
opposite.
to live.
If Nietzsche weren't dead, he would have died laughing.
Right, he would have been like, no, you're supposed to be an individual. You're not supposed to just get in line.
I think he'd just kick them. I don't think he'd even talk to them.
Right. Was he a good guy?
Nietzsche? No.
Hitler? No,
Hitler?
Nietzsche. I'm kidding.
Okay. I don't think he was ever a good guy. At first, I don't have primary knowledge, but what I do know about Nietzsche, he was very solitude. He had a temper, not an easy guy to get along with, and
He sounded intense.
very intense. Oh, you read his books; they're mind blowing. You read 5 pages of Nietzsche, you won't think the same. If you keep reading Nietzsche, you will permanently not think the same.
When you evaluate philosophers, do you take into account how well they were able to apply the philosophy in their own life?
Somewhat, but that's called in philosophy the genetic fallacy. And that is, a philosophy is valid depending or not depending where it came from. So I might read something, but that's, let's say from an Orthodox Jewish perspective. And if someone gets their main ideas from a Greek philosopher, well, they can't be valid because a Greek wrote it. And that's ridiculous. Truth is true. The same thing if a bad person writes an incredibly insightful book. I'm going to say a bad person with a gift for thinking and writing. So I don't connect the two. Look, sometimes people
If they're bad enough.
Pardon me?
Mm.
If they're bad enough, you mean it would be a philosophical book written by an awful person?
Yeah, I guess if the person was bad enough, it can discredit their work. Like Bill Cosby, I was thinking of.
It's a really interesting philosophic question that you're asking.
I get too caught up on that. I'm always trying to find the hypocrisy in things.
Well, that's not a bad thing to do, but I think it's going to stop you from reading something as it is.
And from really believing in something.
Let's start with the reading. So I've read Mein Kampf. I want to see what was in it. So I didn't say, oh, Hitler wrote it. I had to read it. I was trying to look for the ideas he was working with and how those ideas shaped his life and ended up shaping Germany and the destruction that it caused to the world. So I had to read it like it's not by Hitler, it's just by somebody, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. And I just needed to read it like, what's the guy trying to communicate when he wrote it in jail in 1923? I wanted to know. I didn't turn every page. You're horrible, you're horrible, you're horrible. I want to read the book.
Do you think compassion is important for intellectual pursuits?
No. Are you looking for a different answer?
No.
That's my final answer.
No. Well, I guess, what do you think the virtue is in reading Hitler's text? Is it to better understand Hitler so you can stop something like that from
Hitler,
happening again?
what was happening in Germany?
The context.
In the 1920s, because that book helped shape German thought, German intellectual thought, the trajectory of the state of Germany. Politics in the 1920s and the 1930s. I mean, it was the greatest selling book next to the Bible in Germany at that time. No, he made money. I mean, he made a significant amount of money off that book.
Do you think he was somewhat cynical when he wrote it?
No, I think it was entirely purposeful, and he wrote down what he believed. The problem is many people didn't believe that he meant what he believed.
Oh, so they thought he was doing it as kind of like just a populist take.
Yeah, when he said, the Jews this and invade Russia, people say, yeah, because people don't want to believe. It's like Hamas today. They said, kill the Jews, murder every Jew. People say, yeah, that's extreme. They're just trying to rally the troops. They actually meant it, So I tend to take people at their word unless I find something else. Someone says, oh, they don't mean it. I said, well, then why'd they write it? You got to have a better explanation than your opinion that they don't mean it.
Do you think humility is important in intellectual pursuits?
You mean like my humility?
Mm-hmm.
Intellectual humility. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't want to read something through like a judgmental lens. This is right, this is wrong. This is right. I like, when I study anything, I like to let it make a case. So this is called reading the best version of the book. Meaning not the version where I'm putting it down, the thinking in a way that the best version arrives in my head. That's another way that we study just about anything. For example, law, literature. You don't want to come at a law and say, this is a corrupt way to control the masses by a bunch of invested capitalists. I just like to read what the law says. I'll read what the law says, and then I'll decide those kinds of things. But many people come at the text with a whole worldview in mind, and they're not reading the text. This is called eisegesis, by the way. Exegesis means trying to bring meaning out of the text. Eisegesis is reading the text as a mirror. Like it's a mirror of what I already think.
Okay.
So humility means, if it's the right word, humility means I'm going to open this text, I'm going to try to interpret the text, and I want to give it the best reading possible. Like for example, I mean, I think the Bible is beautiful literature, stunning, deep, psychological, philosophic. It's just a bunch of this, this, and this. I said, have you read it? Yeah, and I realized they're bringing a lens to the text. Okay, and so they'll never see the text. Now, I don't know if that's humility as much as don't let my formed opinions get between me and the text. Let me just read what the text says and how the text operates.
So as a piece of art, you would rate the Bible as compelling?
Oh, absolutely. Not every word of it, but certain sections of it for sure.
Would you, if you had to rank it, is it as like philosophically and psychologically powerful as like The Sopranos?
You know, look, every philosophic statement, every philosophic idea, they're oftentimes written in a kind of a programmatic way. Here's the philosophy. And other times you derive a philosophy from a work of literature. So Sopranos is incredibly deeply written kind of literature that we would call cinema. And I've looked at the philosophic dimensions, and I think those writers are brilliant. And the way that it was pulled off was brilliant. Now, when I study the Bible, certain parts of the Bible are not too different from Sopranos. So we're looking for the dark side of human nature, the darkness that motivates people, unintended consequences, the nature of criminality, why some people don't want to live by the law. So I think I knew how to watch The Sopranos because of how I studied the Bible.
When did you feel like intellectually your peers were more on your level?
When I was in college. Oh, by the way, I had a few, when I was in the Marine Corps, wow, I met some intellectual giants in my barracks. Like they were like me, deeply spiritual, very well read, and joined the Marines for a kind of purification so they could live up to their potential. I had one of my drill instructors was clearly a spiritual giant, and he kind of revealed himself to me when he saw that I could see him. So I would say now that you're asking the question, certainly in boot camp, my sergeant, maybe one other Marine, and then when I got to Okinawa, I mean, I could see, so over my life, I've met people that had great depth and great learning, but as far as culturally, I would say when I went to college.
What's your perspective on like promiscuity?
Probably not healthy for the human condition.
I agree.
Yeah.
What do you think it is about a commitment to one person that's like spiritually enriching?
Well, it's profoundly humanizing because to have relationships that are flourishing and productive, you're going to be challenged with things that you never thought you would have to face, because the person you fall in love with is sometimes utterly different from you. Well, no, just different. We'll take imperfection for granted. And then you have to empathize with their worldview and not think, well, since they don't agree with me, then they must be wrong. Maybe I'm wrong, or maybe there's no right or wrong here. It's just the way that we're going to live together. So if part of what it means to be a human being, and I think this is an essential part of our humanity, is to be open-minded, thoughtful, careful, loving, help another person flourish, be of service to another human being. I think that comes out the most in lifelong, intentional, loving partnership.
Did you have a promiscuous period in your life?
Not really. I was shy.
You don't seem shy.
I know I don't seem shy.
Just around girls?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Are
tough.
you shy?
I can be around girls sometimes.
Yeah, I think I was shy.
If it was ever going to come out, that would probably be the circumstance.
Yeah.
Because it's also hard, like if you're a thinker person and that's how you try to relate to people, that can be pretty awkward at times with the opposite sex. It can feel a bit...
Well, when my wife and I met, my wife's Israeli, and when I first went to her to pick her up for a date, she was still getting dressed, and she said, I said, can I look at your library? She said, sure. So I pull a book out of her library, and I'm reading it, and I don't understand a word. My Hebrew's very good. So she comes out, and I says, can I ask you a question? Which is a killer, because I dated a few Israeli women, and I would ask this question like an imbecile, and that ended the date before it began. So the Hebrew language is built on, etymologically built on word roots. And so when you study Hebrew, you learn word roots. So I said to my wife, Mirav, I said, what is the word root of this word? She said, tamid hadin b'shorashim. Oh, you're interested in word roots. It's like, like the sparks began to fly and the hearts and the violins came out. So like that was like love at first discussion of Hebrew word roots.
Do you speak Hebrew?
I do.
And you speak Yiddish?
No.
Oh, you don't speak Yiddish?
No.
What is Yiddish?
Yiddish is a dialect of German.
But it is kind of the common language of like the Jewish diaspora?
European Jews. It was.
And how does it differ from Hebrew?
It's not. It's a Germanic language. Hebrew is a Semitic language. And there's vocabulary.
So meaning that like Hebrew is like something you would teach in school and Yiddish is just something you would conversate in?
We're going to like go back in time?
No, I'm just trying to understand what it means today.
Okay, so we have to root it. Hebrew was not a spoken language until the late early 1900s. It was a study language. So a learned Jew would know how to read complex text in Hebrew, but they wouldn't converse in Hebrew. They could, but they wouldn't.
So it was a dead language brought to life? It's almost like if they just started speaking Latin in Italy or something?
Well, it was not a dead language. It was alive, but as a textual tradition. It was very alive.
But they weren't saying it in like the stores and stuff like that?
No, that was the language of the people. So for Jews in Arabic lands, it would have been Arabic. For Jews in Europe, it was a dialect of German.
Pretty cool that they just brought something back into conversation.
Well, there was a decision when the Zionist movement began. They weren't going to start speaking Yiddish in the Holy Land
because that felt too like casual.
No, it's like too European. They were back in the birthplace of the Hebrew language.
Let's get to our roots.
Yeah, so they started figuring out like we need to a guy named Eliezer Ben Yehuda. He's the guy that created the first dictionary, and people started speaking only Hebrew to their children. And remember, it was not a dead language. It was a language of the learned. But when you know the language of the learned, it's not that hard to start speaking it.
Have you seen the movie Footnote?
I believe I did.
Dude, it's a wonderful movie about this dad and son who are like Hebrew scholars, and the son gets an award for his like writings on it, but they mess up the name, and so it goes to the father, who's like an old stodgy guy who's always been passed over and never really recognized because he's kind of a boring traditionalist. And then it's the son like feeling conflicted over wanting his own kind of notoriety for it, but also wanting to honor his dad, even though he's kind of surpassed him. And it's this wonderful thing about just like how confusing it is to interpret things and how, the human kind of foible gets in the way of all that stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like beautifully crafted story. Yeah,
it's fucking sick.
Yeah, Hebrew scholarship, meaning know the Bible, know the Mishnah, to know the Talmud, to know the history of commentaries. Yeah. So it's an endlessly beautiful cave system, stalagmites, stalactites. It's like just unending beauty.
Yeah, and it seems uniquely rich in the Jewish faith.
I think the only thing similar would be the Hindu tradition, because the Hindu tradition
they get down like that. They study really hard on it.
They have a vast array of holy texts.
And it's almost like, I don't want to say industry, but it's almost like its own kind of ecosystem.
Ecosystem is good. Yeah.
Where there's different camps and groups, and people have a different way of approaching it. Yeah. And there's no real answer. It's mostly the virtue is in how you study it.
It isn't how you say it. There's no authoritative answer.
Right.
See, I think the answer I come up with is probably the best evidence. Like the text, the meaning of the text is the standard. But my answer is not authoritative. I can discuss it. So yeah, there is no canonical answer typically.
Because like the Yiddish speaking population seems to be somewhat diminishing, what are some lasting contributions of Yiddish to society and culture?
The literature. Okay, so I have a Yiddish school book back there that I sometimes read, because my German is decent. My reading German is decent. So I can understand Yiddish when I read it. And if the Yiddish speaker speaks slowly, I can probably understand them, because it's a dialect of German, so I can decode it. But Yiddish culture has an incredible uniqueness to it.
A lot of great artists came out of that.
Yeah, I'm not so aware of the visual artists. I'm more aware of the novelists.
The writers, yeah, like Philip Roth and.
He came out of the culture.
Not Philip Roth, my bad.
No, but he came out of the Yiddish culture. Okay.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you read Catch-22, that's familiar Yiddish culture, especially the use of irony. Okay. So when you read, so I read in translation. I read Yiddish sayings. The Yiddish humor, the Yiddish vocabulary is incredible. There's a book called The Joy of Yiddish. Have you ever seen that?
No.
No. Leonard Roth writes a dictionary of Yiddish, and it's one joke after another. So the Yiddish language the way they use words are typically ironical. They bring in a huge world of meaning. For example, a schlemiel is a clumsy person. A schlemazel is an unlucky person. So what's the difference between them? A schlemiel spills his a plate of soup on the schlemazel. Okay, so when you right?
I don't know. I don't think I'm courtesy laughing. I think that was a genuine laugh.
No,
you know what? I just dig the whole vibe. That's what it is more than
the
anything.
Yiddish language, man, it's hilarious.
Yeah, it's a lot of
when
fun.
you realize how Yiddish speakers think. So I think the great contribution to American culture is irony. So you find in Hollywood, for example, which in some ways was formed by the Jews who came over from Russia, Poland. So there's a lot of Yiddish attitudes. Probably lasted well until the maybe even to today.
What made you decide to go to rabbinical school?
Well, I remember the decision emphatically. I remember the day, the setting, everything. So I wanted to go into politics because I wanted to change the world by changing law. This is a very kind of leftist position. Like the things are bad because we have bad laws. We can repair our laws. Everything's going to get better. And here's something I found out in the Marine Corps. A little story. So they're running us down the beach, and we're supposed to stay in step. And you can't stay in step in sand. And they get so hard that guys begin to faint. So guys are just dropping out right down the beach. So he looks at us and he says, "At the Battle of the Chosen Reservoir, we brought our dead out with us. You disgusting," whatever he said, "you would have left the dead." We all stood up, got in formation. The tiredness exited our bodies. Okay? Because of a story, because of identity. You want to call yourself a Marine? You don't faint on the beach because you're tired. We bring our dead out. We fight in 30 degrees below. So I went, oh my God. He told a story, appealed to my identity, and I physically changed, I and 80 other guys at the same time. So I have many stories like that stuck with me, most of them from boot camp.
So you believe an idea can allow you to supersede your weakness?
Totally. So when I was in a political science class, it's called Comparative Constitution, Long Beach City College, fall of 1976. So the Soviet Constitution outlaws the death penalty. Stalin's Constitution of 1936 outlaws the death penalty. It's one of the worst mass murders in the history of humankind. So I raise my hand and I say, how do we explain this, that the greatest mass murderer, they outlaw the death penalty? He says, we're not morally evaluating people, we're actually looking at their system of government. I said, well, who morally evaluates people? He said, oh, that's religion or something. Oh, that's the magic word. That's religion or something. Because I already taken philosophy, or it's more like a survey. Nobody stood for anything. I go home and I say, if that's religion or something, and I'm a Jew, I think I want to be a rabbi. So I called my local rabbinical school and said, how do I get in?
When is there a time that your religious background and your intellectual perspective has served you incorrectly?
May I think?
Yeah.
Nothing I can recall.
What is a soul?
For our purposes, I'll call it the deep-seated process of human identity, formation of values, and where we have a connection with the divine. If I'm just limited to three statements.
So when did religious judgment of homosexuals come into being?
I don't think it was religious. I think it was cultural, meaning religions were aspects of culture. I think in ancient times, some cultures were permissive of homosexuality, and some cultures weren't. Not just religion. See, it's very hard to use our definition of religion and look at ancient Mesopotamia. You see what I'm saying? There are cultures, and different cultures have taken dim views of certain behaviors.
This is going to sound glib and kind of trying to grab onto a big...
You mean bombastic?
Yeah, ugly subject.
Yeah.
But I'm somewhat serious in this. Actually, pretty serious. I'm just skeptical of myself. But does religion have an opinion on transgender athletes?
No. Do religious people have opinions?
Of course,
Yeah.
but do the governing bodies of religion have a perspective on it?
They probably do. It doesn't interest me.
You don't think it's the responsibility of religion to weigh in on those
I don't want to
things?
judge other people. I mean, someone might think it's their responsibility. Someone doesn't think it's not. I'm not here to judge other people. I have a basic criterion, remember, and included in freedom, included in dignity and value is something called fairness. So somebody could say, for a biological male to compete in women athletes, and it doesn't sound fair to me, but what do I know? I'll let the athletic boards deal with that. I try to worry about things in really the things that I face as a person and as a rabbi.
What do you think about establishing a Jewish state in Southeast Florida, like somewhere between Palm Beach and Miami?
It would have to be in the land of Israel, so that excludes it right away.
Or what about Key Largo?
As what?
A Jewish state.
It has to be in the land of Israel, so that's my final answer.
Why?
It's a priori. It's the root of our heritage in the land of Israel.
But all the problems seem to be coming from feeling like it needs to be in that geographic location.
It's about other people's feelings.
But if it's an idea, couldn't it exist somewhere else?
It's more than an idea. It's actual attachment to a specific place in the physical universe. Like really, Muslims have Mecca and Medina. You could say, well, why don't you just build Medina in Mongolia? Because it's Mecca and Medina.
No, you can't say that.
You can. It wouldn't make any sense. Because
people get pissed, though.
I don't care if they get pissed. Something happened in Mecca and Medina.
No, I don't want to be,
If I wouldn't say to a Muslim, move Mecca and Medina because something happened, like the Hajj. Muhammad went from Mecca to Medina.
I'm not trying to fire you up.
No, do I sound fired up?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean to be emphatic.
Nice.
I'm not fired up. I'm just saying when things historically happen somewhere, you can't act as if the location, the geography doesn't have profound importance.
So because of what's going on in Israel right now, it feels like there's going to be a shift of Jewish politics in America that will trend more towards the conservative side. Do you see that happening?
So we're going to try to define this. There's a so-called, the political left. Now there's so-called a radical left that hates the political left. Now this is part of Marxism. Marxism hates civil society and what they call amelioration. When you try to make things better, you're putting off the revolution. You're putting off the overthrow. Because I think the political left does very good things. The radical left have a basic Marxian take on things, which I think is...
And what do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's...
Do you just mean that power is bad, basically?
Yes, what I'll call vulgar Marxism, because Marx actually was an incredible philosopher of the human condition. But let's say something just like the basic take. There is an oppression of the working class. So we'll stop there. And therefore, when they look at the world, they're looking for oppressors and those oppressed.
Yeah.
When you're taught that this is the way to see the world, you're always on the lookout. Well, who's the oppressor? Who's the oppressed? With very little sophistication. So what's happened is Israel's seen as the oppressor, and which I think is just a ridiculously facile notion, and therefore the Palestinians are the oppressed, and that has unleashed this justification of the Hamas atrocities on October 7th, destruction of the state of Israel, and I think when Jews look at this, they're not going to question, immigration policy. They're going to say, we don't want this country taken over by people who want to destroy the state of Israel.
I guess for a lot of us, though, it is more fluid than just oppressor and oppressed, and that it can kind of change with circumstances. But it seems to me, in my naive understanding of things, that initially Israel was in the sympathetic position of the one being attacked who had the atrocities committed against them. But now maybe their reaction has been disproportionate and they have turned into the oppressor. Not that they are innately that, but that their actions have designated them as such.
Okay, so disproportionate warfare. That's the ideal of warfare.
Right, so what you're saying is to win it is disproportionate.
When you want to win a war against an evil enemy, you don't start keeping a proportion tab. Now, I don't think people know much about war. You see, I'm a student of warfare, especially Second World War on. So it's such an odd question when people are trying to win a war. Like when we were fighting Japan, to crush Japan that was committing genocide in China, or crush Nazi Germany that was murdering people to the last day of the war. We needed to defeat the military power of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan.
But you would say that there is a tab for which percentage of the casualties are military opposition and which percentages...
The tab is only intentional, unavoidable, unnecessary killing of innocents. So now we're back to a question we talked about earlier. What if the enemy weaponizes their civilians? They're basically saying, in the court of world opinion, they will make you stop the war so we can do October 7th again, because that's what Hamas says. We will do October 7th again and again and again and again. We're going to do this to everybody who does not follow our form of Islam, like Islamic State. Now, let's say you know that. Okay, you know that you have a group there that will relentlessly, every now and then, cross the border into San Diego, maybe get all the way up to Santa Ana and massacre people. And then we go in and try to push them down. The world says, oh, disproportionate. We stop, and they're going to do it again. Now, some people would say, well,
that's it. That's what it should be.
That's what it should be. Like, we attack, they hide behind civilians, we'll pull back, and they just keep doing it again and again and again.
Well, and aren't there other people who would argue that if they had more of an autonomous state, then maybe those situations wouldn't occur?
You have to know some history here. Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005.
And then Hamas was elected.
Correct.
Into a position of power in Gaza.
Elected, yeah, 2007, I think. Now,
which was kind of propagated by the United States, right? We kind of pushed Israel into
doing it.
But we misunderstood how the election would go.
Well, I think in general, occupying other countries unnecessarily is not good. I think we believe that. And there was the Oslo Accords, where there was the idea that Israel and Palestine would reach an accord. Israel would pull back from the occupation of the West Bank, and they would try to figure out a two-state solution. Now, the Palestinian Liberation Organization technically ruled Gaza. Now, from what we understand, the people of Gaza voted for Hamas not because they wanted a tyrannical theocracy. It was a vote against the PLO. They didn't know what they were getting because they've never had another election since. Human rights, gay rights. The people who are protesting Israel, they wouldn't survive more than a few days in Gaza. Now, Israel pulled back. So they had complete autonomy. You could do whatever you want. But the day Israel pulled out, they began shooting rockets. So what sense does one make of that? Because the world wanted Gaza to become Singapore. They wanted to become a prosperous, autonomous place, democratic, civil rights. I mean, that was our image of what they would do given autonomy. It surprised everybody that they voted for Hamas. I'm not surprised because it was a vote against the PLO more than Hamas. I'm not surprised that Hamas turned it into a tyranny. That's what Hamas wants. And then they shot rockets at Israel because the Hamas charter says destroy the state of Israel.
So do you think it's in Hamas's best interest for Israel to remain aggressive because it justifies their existence in Gaza?
Yeah, it's kind of theater. But see, that's not the main thing going on. The main thing going on is a principle in what I'm going to call a fringe of Islam that wants to murder the Jews. It's a fringe. We will murder every Jew and push them into the sea. That's inalterable. We're not going to rethink it. That's our intention if it takes us 1,000 years. Okay? Now that is a theme. It's a belief. Hamas has that belief. Now, when you start there, they shoot rockets. Israel responds. They say, look how disproportionate it is. And the whole time, as we know now, they're building tunnels under classrooms, tunnels under mosques, tunnels under United Nations schools, which Israel's been saying all along. But people don't want to look that hard. They say, you bombed a UN classroom. Israel knew there's a so-called Hamas metro system under Gaza. First thing you have to ask is that known that in asymmetrical warfare, the less powerful side builds tunnel systems? Yes, Vietnam. In fact, that was like the gold standard for tunnel systems. Not as sophisticated as we see there. Did Hamas have the materials? Yes. They imported tons and tons of concrete.
What's the significance of this?
The significance is, how did I know that there's a metro system in Gaza?
And that's being disputed?
It used to be.
By who?
Hamas said there's no tunnel system. There's no tunnel system.
So you think that if there is tunnels there, it justifies the attack?
It's required.
Is there any measure of non-combatant life that could be lost that you think would negate Israel's right to attack?
Unnecessary, avoidable.
That sounds like semantics to me.
No, it's not semantics.
It sounds like Donald Rumsfeld with like the unknowable not knowing.
It's actually the opposite of that.
Okay.
We have to look at a situation and say, is this unavoidable? So in the United Nations Guides of Warfare, you may not weaponize a cultural, religious, medical institution. Now, they did that. So Israel has to show to the world, Hamas has a headquarters under there. You see how important that is? Because otherwise, if we're going to take over a hospital and people say, well, those are unnecessary, avoidable casualties, then it's a war crime.
No, but I think even if there is a military headquarters underneath, it's still hard to justify.
It's not hard to justify. It's the rules of warfare.
So what is your ideal outcome for the Israel-Palestine conflict?
The destruction of Hamas.
I kind of want to ask about the blockade of Gaza after the election.
Okay, so after the election of Hamas, that's when the blockade was created.
No, after the attack on Israel with rockets. You see, it's not the election of Hamas. It's attack on civilians.
But that blockade created a situation where you had a subjugated state that was completely
not at all.
reliant on...
Not at all, because it was a interdiction, not a blockade. All the goods that the Palestinians wanted were trucked through and made through a border crossing. Now, when they did something warlike, like attacked Israel with rockets, then Israel would tighten the blockade and say, you have to stop this. But it was a way to make them stop attacking Israel. When they said, okay, we're done, then the interdiction would allow just about anything through that could not be weaponized. Clearly, it was profoundly inefficient. They built an underground military system.
What's the difference between a blockade and an interdiction?
Well, a blockade means nothing gets in or out. Interdiction says anything not for a war purpose gets in, but is offloaded at our port, we inspect it and truck it down.
For such a highly competent military, do you have any notion of why there was such a lapse in security?
So now we're discussing the failures of a competent military. So I would say a peace fever, as opposed to a war fever, captured Israel because of the Saudi offer for normalization. The Hamas was moderating itself, apparently, obviously not truly. There were deals to allow more people from Gaza into Israel to work. And so things seemed to be getting better because I think there was an attitude.
There was a desire to believe in a more peaceful world.
Desire gets in the way of rationality all the time. So the desire not to have a war was more powerful than the fact that they were preparing for war.
Have you been in a lot of fistfights?
Very few.
What started those?
Getting beat up.
Oh, you got attacked first.
Yeah, I lived in Compton. I was beat up a lot. I mean, I have multiple attackers typically.
Because you were different?
Because of white.
Are black guys good fighters?
Generally speaking, yeah. I mean, the guys in my neighborhood
were tough.
They were tough, and we would slap box. And they had the guys in my neighborhood. I would say they were all quicker than I was. I was a little bit flat-footed.
More fast twitch muscle.
They were better athletes. I was known.
You were scrappy though.
Yeah, enough. I mean, I had to learn how to fight. It did not come naturally to me at all. I had to learn how to fight.
So people can come to you with a lot of their problems.
True.
In your estimation, what's the most common mistake humans make in how they live?
Lack of commitment to virtue.
So they're just selfish? They're just like, how do I make this work for me short term?
No, they have not made a commitment to self-regulation because they feel too much.
So when you say virtue, what do you mean?
Self-regulation.
You mean just like not being triggered and working through a problem?
Anger, criticism, complaining, harsh language, defensiveness, all the things where people, when they try to solve something, they get sullen, they get resentful, they get punitive.
We go to nasty attitudes too quickly.
Yeah, or some people go to defensive attitudes. Honey, please stop, please agree with me. And defensiveness doesn't work after a couple of tries. So I look at the behaviors and I say to people, could you stop talking? Can you stop talking? Shh, calm down. You feel your feelings, think of a kind, clear, reasonable response, and you don't talk till you have it.
And why don't people do that?
They get too emotional.
If you had to pick poems that would help someone live their life, which poems would you pick?
Out of the gate, Rilke, but then each according to the person. And my two favorite poets are Leonard, Cohen, and Rilke, and they're very different poets.
Did you have a relationship with Leonard Cohen?
Yeah, I was his rabbi.
And were you a fan of his before you became his rabbi?
No.
So through knowing him, he became your favorite poet?
More after he died.
Interesting. Because during his life, you didn't want to be a fan of his?
Exactly. Well conceived and well put.
They just did a documentary about Leonard Cohen, right?
Correct, on the song Hallelujah.
Because it took him decades to write it.
No, I don't think that's true. He's always been writing it. There's no final version of it.
Right.
No one has ever performed all of Hallelujah because I think he told me there's 200 verses. So.
And so when Leonard Cohen came to you, was he in a period of religious crisis?
I would say personal crisis. His money, as you know, his money had been stolen. He was trying to figure out where to go next. I met him at a wedding. I did a little shtick at the wedding, the 10 Criterion Commandments for a good wedding. And so I got a big laugh from everybody. And I got seated next to him. And he said, pretty good, Rabbi. And he said, so what's your Judaism? I said, post-Orthodox Neo-Hasidic. He goes, so he put the acronym together. Very nice. So we kind of wowed each other.
I can't do. Oh, nice.
Yeah. So we were like.
You were vibing.
We were vibing. And the next week, his Anjani, his lady, came to synagogue. She really liked what I did. And she said, I'm going to that rabbi synagogue. And then she went home and said, Leonard, it's amazing. And Leonard came and he never left.
Then so you kind of stayed away from his work because you didn't want it to...
I didn't want to be a fan.
You didn't want to influence how you treated him.
Correct.
And then after he passed away, then you just read all of it and watched all of it?
Just about everything, yeah. See, I was his rabbi. So he was interested in Kabbalah. He was interested in theory of life. He had more of an Eastern tradition. I don't. And he liked to talk about it because I don't think he was satisfied with his spiritual path that he's had most of his life. And he met someone with a different spiritual path who really meant it and really thought it out. He was pretty impressed with that. And
that was you?
Yeah. Yeah, meaning like someone as deep as he is who's thought it out and came to a different conclusion. So he was really interested in that. So we spent a lot of time talking about deep things, and I think he really, really enjoyed me. He thought I was a very wise person.
Do you miss him a lot?
I do. Yeah, he's like a brother to me.
Do you believe in an afterlife?
I do.
And what do you think is like the criterion for entry?
I think the soul doesn't die when we die, so I think there's an afterlife for every soul.
It's going to go somewhere.
Yeah, soul goes somewhere. Soul goes back home.
Is there good outcomes and bad outcomes?
I don't know. I can only tell you what I've experienced, and what I think. I think God, essence is love and grace. I think we go through the portal of death and we get cleansed of our sins, and we go back and merge with the force of creation.
Or maybe get another crack at it.
I believe that to be true.
And then when you went back and went through Leonard's work, did you see any of your guys' conversations in there?
So we'd have to go to poetry written after 2006. So yes, but not definitively.
Oh, so he came to you in 2006?
Correct.
Oh, so he was like...
He was cooked.
Yeah.
But he used to send me poems, and we used to talk about them.
Is there a particular Leonard Cohen poem that you really like?
I like the big ones. I like Anthem and Tower Song. I like an obscure one called The Sun.
Could you read us one right now or say one?
I'd have to go grab my books.
Okay.
The Sun. It's a very quirky poem.
Do you, when you like see like hot women, do you like just go, oh, she's hot? Or do you go, oh, she's hot, like, but I need to remember that I'm a deep human being?
Well, there's actually a blessing in Hebrew for seeing when you see a beautiful person.
What is it?
You praise God who makes the world beautiful. That's it.
Praise God.
Okay, I noticed that this person has something called beauty, and then just move on.
Nice.
You want to hear The Sun?
Yeah, do you want to read one of his
Sure.
poems?
Yeah. It's a quirky one. I've been to the sun. It's nothing special. A place of violence, much like our own. The sun said, I'm an open book. Be patient. You will find that everything happens the same way here and there. The solar winds are something else. No one masters them. No one really navigates them. You survive them, or you are never heard from again. I love the way the sun speaks. It's so calm and honest, except when seized by its own misfortunes. Right? Except when seized by its own misfortunes.
What do you think he means by that?
All of us.
We miss like the great power of being alive.
We get seized by our own misfortunes.
Right, and that's very close to your teachings too.
Very much.
Because you said that's the number one mistake people make, is that they go into these kind of...
emotional frenzies and they don't have a container.
What's the biggest change you've ever seen in a person?
A person who gave up anger and criticism.
You've seen that happen.
I made a big case for this on my first big podcast, The Rich Roll. I had people email me from all over the world, said, I listened to your podcast, I made a decision, thank you. Okay, so I was like, wow. Then I have people who study with me. I'll give you a brief example.
Yeah.
So I say to parents, don't criticize, condemn your kids. Listen. But what about, I call it the whatabouts. I said, I gave you my final answer. Stop criticizing, angering, using harsh language with your kid. See what happens next. I want to put a stripe on your white belt, but I can't because you're asking questions that are not appropriate. So how about just do what I say? This is very jiu-jitsu-y. She finally gets it. Comes back and says, oh my God. She says, I did exactly what you said. The conflict went away, and my daughter said, have you been kidnapped by a cult? And no, I'm just like, when you hurt me, I say, ouch. That's it. Mom, you're so stupid. Ouch. That hurt me.
That really does put the other person on their, because when you make someone else aware.
Bingo.
But here's me being ultra strategic about it.
Okay.
It's not actually good to say ouch every time. Sometimes you do want to fight back. And
not smart.
No, I think it is. Because then I think when the ouch does come, it's less expected. And then they've leaned in even more. You stick your chin out, so then they come with the big.
So my focus is the maximization of human dignity.
Not winning the conflict.
No, that has nothing to do with the maximization of human dignity. You don't even know if you're right. Why would
well,
you
that
want to
sounds
win?
like its own kind of victory.
It's not a victory.
But you know those people who are like, I'm not competitive, and I'm like, well, that's your way of winning.
It's not true. It's not true what you just said. It's clever, but it's not true.
What isn't true?
That my wanting to honor the dignity of another person.
Oh no, I didn't mean I was just saying that you could categorize it that way.
You could, and it's a clever way to put it. But
it's cheap.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that to you because I wouldn't want to impair your dignity. But see, what sometimes people do is say everything people do is in their self-interest. So even being kind is self-interest. That is an axiom that's not provable.
I say that to protect myself, because then if I can believe that, if I can have that, because I think I'm a very sensitive soul, so if I can have that cynical outlook on the world, I feel somewhat protected.
Yeah, but you're not protected from a spiritual black belt, because I can just unravel that if I wanted to, and I don't care to. And then you would actually feel not smart.
Do you think I'm afraid of feeling not smart?
A little bit. A little bit.
Maybe for a moment.
Yeah. No, you're engaging, you're quirky, you have questions, you want to off the center, you want to sneak a question in here to like destabilize me. I see your game. I'm a black belt. I know what I get your game. It's a cool game.
Do you think I'm sincere though?
Yeah, I think you sincerely want to have fun. You want to tussle. Mm-hmm. You like to tussle. That's okay.
Is there a deeper way for me to tussle?
It's your way. Yeah, tussling is natural. That's why I'm not against conflict. Meaning, I think conflict is tussling. I just don't want to get to the point where people hurt each other deeply and can't.
No, I agree with that. There's got to be rules of engagement.
Yeah, so I tussle with my wife. We tussle all the time, right? But we don't go over an edge where it's going to really hurt somebody and wound them.
All right, so I'm going to ask you about advancements in different fields that you think were particularly significant for human civilization.
Okay.
First, moral.
Advancement in morality, the most significant, abolition of slavery.
Spiritual.
Spiritual, the discovery of the unconscious.
When was that?
Freud. I mean, he was not definitive, but he opened it up for discussion.
Technological.
I'll have to say the printing press.
Intellectual.
I'll have to say Plato and Socrates. That changed the world.
And political.
Political liberalism. The idea of the good and the right, and the job of government is to form governments that protect the good and the right.
And what is that, like Locke and Voltaire and those guys?
More Locke than Voltaire. I mean, Locke's second treatise on government focuses that the job of the government is to, like, the human condition is we have a right to do things that don't harm others. We have a right to our property. We have a right to be lived without the interference of the government. And what's the best formulation of government that protects human rights?
Did Locke have any personal problems?
No, remember, I don't know. If he did,
you ignore that stuff.
I'm not interested in it. It's not like I ignore it. I'm just not interested. It never even occurred to me to look that up.
What is the unconscious?
Well, by definition, that which is not conscious. But what Freud produced was a sense that there's an unconscious mechanism at work that produces behaviors, and we think we have motivations for behaviors, but we have unconscious motivations for behaviors. This is Freud. So all along, people have known they have an unconscious, but they didn't think of it as like a mechanism with a kind of an engineering miracle. So ever since Freud, people have been interested in, well, what is the nature of the unconscious? And especially the anti-post-Freudians, for example, Jung was in many ways.
Archetypes.
Yeah, exactly. So anti-Freudian. So if you look at the history of psychology, especially I'll call theoretical psychology, like what is the human being? So Freud opens all that up. So now when I treat people, I have my own theory of the unconscious as if it's my work. I mean, I don't have a total theory. I have a theory as it relates to the person in front of me.
And is it close to like the id, the ego, and the superego?
No, I don't find that useful. I don't think it's true or useful.
How do you do it?
Well, remember, if the id means just it in Greek, it meant like a force of passion.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we have passion.
Mine wants to eat.
Yeah, or anything you're passionate about. No. Okay. And then people have a will to goodness, and some people have a will to victimhood, and some people have a will to guilt or to envy. So there's all kinds of different things operating in the unconscious, meaning we're not tripartite, because you see, if you think of id, the passions, the regulator, so-called superego, and then the ego, I guess means the
Baseline
flourishing self or something like that. Well, who's doing that? Who went to therapy? Not the id, not the superego, not the ego. So there's something else that said, I need to go to therapy to learn about these three things. What do we call that? So I just don't find it useful. Meaning, I think we are much more than those three things.
So you see like a will to cohesiveness in people.
Some people have a will to disorder and chaos. You see, I don't...
And we're just born that way.
Somewhat. I think there's a genetic code. I think there's early childhood, things that happen ever since, all kinds of formative experiences. So I'm more in the existentialist therapy tradition.
Are you at all like a psychological determinist?
No.
So you think people can change?
Yeah, we have free will, for sure.
You've seen people change.
Absolutely.
Have you seen murderers repent and become solid?
I don't think I've ever worked with a murderer.
Why not?
They don't come to me.
They don't want help?
I don't know. I don't think they know about me.
Are you prejudiced towards murderers?
I have prejudged them to be bad people if they have murdered an innocent person with no cause.
That's fair.
Yeah. I mean, it's called a prejudgment, right?
But you wouldn't define someone who killed people in war as a murderer.
I would not, because it's not
fair.
war. There's a special thing called the ethics of war. And in the ethics of war, it inherently involves justified killing.
Do you ever get like horny when you read the begats section of the Old Testament?
The which section?
Begats.
Never happened to me.
But I mean, there's a lot of subtext there about fornication.
There's actually not.
But the one guy begat the other guy who begat
That's not what it's about. It's about creating, most of those names are metaphorical, by the way. So like, for example, earth bore the tiller bore the city. So people don't know that you're reading the history of civilization, usually. And so it's metaphoric, and it's something like the archaeology of civilization.
So when it gets into the names, it's not even necessarily that they shot them out. It's that they taught that person.
It's not the interesting part. The interesting part is the Bible functions poetically and metaphorically in those parts. People don't know that because they don't know Hebrew and they don't know how to read the names metaphorically.
And I swear to God, I'm not even being glib here. 100% just trying to connect.
Sure.
Has there ever been like odd circumstances that did make you horny?
Odd circumstances? Nothing comes to mind.
Oh, that's good. That's awesome. Do you care to ask me?
I have a lot of questions for you.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Who dropped you on your head, man?
So to end, can you put me in a rear naked choke and I'll try to hand fight out of it?
Sure. Okay, so you have a good defense. So I'd go to something else right now.
You would switch from this?
Yeah, I wouldn't stay here.
I don't think I can get you off though.
No,
I can hold you here.
I mean, I could work on it, but I don't care to. I mean, look.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of room.
Look, you're good. You're strong, but I wouldn't stay here.
I understand.
Yeah. Look, you start out with the defense, which was really smart. And so as a black belt,
2-on-1, right?
Yeah, 2-on-1. So you have a good 2-on-1. But as a black belt, I wouldn't stay there. I mean, I would probably
hurts.
put you down and go into mount and go an arm lock or something.
Hey, look, you can say all sorts of things.
No. You have an excellent rear naked defense.
Really?
Yeah.
Excellent?
Props. Yeah, because I have a very good rear naked.
Dude, your grip was strong. I would have given up after a certain amount of time. You had me.
Yeah. You're good.
Thank you.